class is now in session. I am Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing another Sharks player review, and this time around we've got Sharks forward Fabian Zetterlund. Now, in my previous review, I talked about Mikael Granlund, and I mentioned how he was one of the biggest surprises for the San Jose Sharks this past year. Well, when it comes to Fabian Zetterlund, he is perhaps the biggest surprise of the San Jose Sharks over this past season. This is because when he was originally acquired in the Timo Meier trade, he was not exactly a huge name brand player from the New Jersey Devils. Many Sharks fans were hoping that the Sharks would pick up Dawson Mercer as a young roster forward. So when it was Zetterlund who came over instead, it definitely left a lot of people somewhat let down about that news. However, of course, we were very willing to give him a look over the 22 games that he would end up playing to see if he could make a good first impression. And as we know, it's going to be very tough to make that type of transition. Zetterlund was in his rookie season playing with the team that drafted him, and so to make the jump not only to a completely new environment, but also a significantly worse team, because the Devils at the time were quite good on their way to the playoffs, while the Sharks were one of the worst teams in the entire league. That's not an easy jump to make, and so you're not expecting a ton of points to be put up by Zetterlund, but perhaps more in the realm of like 6 or 7 points, a couple of goals over a 22-game stint. But instead, Zetterlund had just 3 points and all 3 of them assists, meaning not a single goal over those 22 games. And this was not a situation where you're sitting there thinking, wow, Zetterlund is so unlucky, so snake-bitten, the goaltender just seems to have his number every single time. He could have had a couple goals here, a couple of points there. Zetterlund was in fact one of the worst players for the San Jose Sharks over the time that he played. And he quickly worked himself from a potential top 6 role, where he actually got a couple of looks, down to just being a fourth line forward who really only remained in the lineup for a lack of a better option otherwise from the San Jose Sharks. It was such a bad look that going into that year's offseason where Zetterlund was up for another contract, there was actually the possibility that the Sharks wouldn't bother bringing him back for the upcoming season. Now, realistically, that was probably not going to happen. It'd be quite crazy for Mike Grier to acquire a particular rookie forward from a team in a trade and then 22 games later just to decide to not actually re-sign him or anything like that. But the fact that there was even the slight potential of that occurring just goes to show how bad of a first look that the Sharks got from Fabian Zetterlund. And so going into the next season, so this past year, 23-24, in my lineup preview videos, I had Zetterlund in my 4 mock lineups as a bottom 6 forward in each and every one of them, behind players like Kevin Labanc or Philip Zadina, because I had so little faith in Zetterlund. And in fact, after the preseason, in my season preview video, which was my final lineup prediction right before the regular season started, I actually had Zetterlund as the Sharks' 13th forward because his preseason was absolutely no different from the 22 games he had at the end of last year. Extremely unimpressive and downright bad for him. So I didn't even necessarily think he was going to get a chance come just the first game of the year. But of course, as we know, David Quinn is not a big fan of a player like Kevin Labanc, and plus rookie players are going to have a difficult time cracking the lineup. So indeed, Zetterlund managed to make it onto the roster, and it ended up being a great thing and a great call by David Quinn, because Zetterlund pretty quickly worked himself up to a top 6 spot in the lineup, and that's pretty much where he remained for the entirety of the rest of the year. Now, this is partially due to the long-time injury of Logan Couture, where he only played 6 games, and of course partially also due to the fact that Alex Barabanov was a complete disappointment this year and was not a viable top 6 option for the San Jose Sharks. But it was certainly not like a pity type of situation where, oh, well, we feel bad and there's no other option, so we'll just put this guy who's completely out of his depth. This is not like when the Sharks had Matt Nieto on the second line last year. Zetterlund certainly deserved to have a chance in the Sharks' top 6. And of course, when you compare to other teams' top 6 and other teams' top line wingers, Zetterlund is likely going to find himself near the bottom of any list of those types of players. But the fact that he was even serviceable enough was quite impressive, which turned around Sharks fans' view of this player from, oh, I don't even really want him in the lineup, to suddenly becoming one of the Sharks' fan favorite players on the team. And if we take a look at his statistics, we see he played every single game this past season for the San Jose Sharks. In fact, the only player on the Sharks roster to play in all 82 games. Certainly, there is a bit of a luck situation here. He doesn't get injured, as that could eliminate any player from the lineup, but it is still definitely a good positive for him to show the consistency level there. Sure, it is about injury, but it's also about conditioning, and it's also about keeping up a consistent level of play. There were multiple players faced with a healthy scratch this season, and with how last year went for Zetterlund, it was certainly in the cards for him to potentially be a healthy scratch at multiple points this year, and yet he always played himself into the lineup and into the Sharks' top 6. So full 82-game season for him, really quite good. 24 goals actually ended up leading the team in that particular category. That's both somewhat disappointing to the fact that the Sharks' leading scorer has only 24 goals, but still a testament to how well Zetterlund did. And we actually saw him multiple times show off a pretty effective shot, not quite at the level of, an Alex Ovechkin or an Austin Matthews, but relatively competitive in the NHL. Definitely scored in situations where you wouldn't have necessarily expected much of anything to occur. Also to go with 20 assists for 44 points. That is only behind, of course, Mikael Granlund, the leading scorer, as well as 1 point behind William Eklund. Generally a really successful output in terms of points. When it comes to plus minus, it obviously doesn't look particularly great. A minus 34 is really quite bad, but considering the Sharks were the worst team in the league, and Zetterlund, who is not necessarily a great defensive player, though I guess you could say is relatively average, was constantly facing other teams' top lines and top competition because of the fact that he found himself primarily on the first line, especially near the end of the season with Mikael Granlund. It was always going to be a very tough role for Zetterlund to take on, and I thought he did an admirable enough job in that position. So a minus 34, while obviously not very good at all on paper, is not necessarily the end of the world and something that is a huge knock against him. And then when it comes to his time on ice, 18 minutes and 51 seconds, the second leading forward in this particular category, a good bit behind Mikael Granlund, who I, of course, talked about in my previous review, but still, almost 19 minutes of ice time per game is really an impressive output. In fact, if you actually take a look at the first 6 games that Zetterlund played this season, back when he was even a big question mark for whether or not he should be in the lineup in general, he averaged around 13 minutes over those 6 games. Over the final 6 games of the season, he had close to 20 minutes of average ice time per game. He went from just being that third line forward perhaps to being a top line guy who also gets number 1 power play minutes, who also is played pretty significantly on the penalty kill and in the 6-on-5 and in the 3-on-3s. He was like a mini Granlund throughout much of this season. So Zetterlund, the expectations were exceptionally low and he outperformed them significantly. Like I said, perhaps the biggest surprise for the San Jose Sharks this past year, and as such, while it is a small notch below Mikael Granlund, he ends up also getting the grade of a B+. Class dismissed.